7 times the sea called his name. Each voyage began, but none stayed the same. But once the harbor slipped from sight, the world refused to stay aright. An island moved beneath his feet and left no path for safe retreat. A valley shone with gems of light while serpents waded through the night. A law sent living men below, an old man's grip refused to go. A river vanished under stone. Winged men rose where he stood alone. Each road returned him home once more, then called him back beyond the shore. Now hear what waded past the shore, for each return concealed one more. Beneath the burning Baghdad sky, a weary porter passed slowly by. He laid his burden beside a wealthy gate and rested there, unaware of fate. He expected only a few moments of rest. The heat had drained him, sweat ran from him, and every step had become work. The space before the gate had been swept and sprinkled with water. A mild breeze moved there, and beside the gate stood a broad bench. Sinbad lowered his burden onto the bench and sat down. Then music came from behind the gates. From inside came the sound of strings and lutes, sweet singing, and the calls of birds. Doves, nightingales, blackbirds, bulbuls, and curlews. The porter also caught the scent of fine food and drink drifting out through the gate. Drawn closer by the sounds and scents, Sinbad looked through the gate and glimpsed a great garden filled with servants and attendants, a household whose splendor seemed fit for kings and sultans. The contrast between that abundance and his own hardship astonished him. He raised his eyes to the sky. He asked God's forgiveness, saying that he did not question his judgment. Then his frustration spilled out in bitter verse. His shadow falls the same as mine. We both were shaped by one design. Yet every dawn I wake to strain. Each day adds weight, each hour more pain. Another lives in ease and cheer. No burden like my own comes near. He spends his days with food and wine, while sweat and aching hours are mine. From one same seed we both began. I am as he is, man to man. Yet worlds apart our fortunes lie, like wine and vinegar side by side. I bring no false complaint to you. Your judgment's wise, your justice true. Before the last of his bitter verse had faded, the gate opened. A young, finely dressed servant appeared, took the porter by the hand, and told him, "Come in. My master is calling for you." The porter tried to refuse, but could not. He left his load in the entrance hall and followed the servant inside. The servant led him beyond the garden and into a beautiful, dignified house. There, Sinbad found a grand gathering unlike anything in his own life, with servants and attendants moving quietly through the place. The gathering was set with fruits, fine dishes, grape wine, and instruments for music. Guests of rank sat in order, and female musicians were placed according to their stations. At the head of the gathering sat an older man, handsome and dignified, with the bearing of a man of wealth and authority. The porter bowed low before him and stood with his head lowered until the man invited him to sit. Food was brought, and the porter ate until he was full. He praised God, washed his hands, and thanked his host for the meal. When the porter finished, the old man asked, "What is your name, and what work do you do?" "My name is Sinbad the porter, sir. I carry goods for hire." The old man smiled. "Your name is like mine. I am Sinbad the Sailor." The sailor then turned to him. "I heard the verses you recited outside my gate. Repeat them for me." The porter lowered his eyes. "By God, sir, Do not hold it against me. Weariness, hardship, and poverty can make a man forget his manners." The sailor replied, "Do not be ashamed. You have become my brother. Repeat the verses. They pleased me." The porter repeated the verses. When he finished, the sailor nodded and leaned back. "Know this, porter. I did not reach the happiness and ease you see without great hardship, weariness, and many terrors." Then came the explanation for everything the porter had seen inside the gate. "Listen to what happened to me in my 7 voyages, and you will understand what this comfort cost." His first road to the sea began with ease, with wealth enough to live as he might please. But fortune spent became a sharper call: to trade, to travel, and to risk a fall. Sinbad began with the mistake that sent him to sea at all. "My father was a merchant who left me considerable wealth. In my youth, I lived freely on fine food, drink, clothing, and the company of friends until much of that wealth was gone." A saying attributed to Solomon came back to him: "3 truths I speak, and all are true. Death's final day beats life anew. A living dog, though weak, has breath, and stands above a lion in death. When earthly splendors fade and fall, the grave is better than palace hall. By toil are lofty honors won. Who seeks the heights must labor on. For pearls, the diver braves the sea. For rank and wealth, hard work's the fee. But he who seeks the heights with ease will waste his years on fantasies." The warning stayed with him. He sold what remained of his property and gathered 3,000 gold coins. With that money, he bought merchandise for trade and traveled to Basra. In Basra, Sinbad joined a merchant ship with a company of traders. They sailed from island to island and from sea to sea, buying and selling as they went. After many days, the ship reached an island that looked exactly like what tired sailors wanted to see: a garden rising from the water. The captain anchored nearby and allowed some of the merchants and passengers to go ashore. Sinbad went with them. Solid ground felt safe beneath the sun. They spread their blankets, thinking danger done. They gathered wood and fed the waiting fire. Then something moved beneath them, slow and dire. Sinbad first blamed the sea still in his head. A cup rolled loose. A sailor laughed instead. The ground moved once more beneath the crowd. Not like an earthquake shaking earth or cloud. It rose. From the ship came screaming. The captain stood at the rail waving both arms. "Back to the boats! It's not an island!" For one stunned moment, nobody understood what the captain had just said. The dark ground beneath the fire split with a shudder. Water rushed over one side. The entire surface tilted. Men began running. The captain's voice carried over the water. The truth was worse than the warning. They had been cooking on an enormous sea creature that had floated near the surface so long that sand and vegetation had gathered across its back. The heat of the fires had driven it awake. The creature plunged. The world became water. Sinbad had enough time to jump before the surface vanished beneath him. The sea struck him hard. The captain and those who had managed to reach the ship sailed away, leaving the men still in the water behind. Sinbad struggled in the sea until God provided him with a large wooden basin of the kind used for washing aboard the ship. He climbed onto it and kicked through the water with his legs like oars. For a day and a night, wind and waves carried him across the sea. The sea did not kill him. After a day and a night, the current drove him toward another island. He caught hold of a branch near the shore and pulled himself out of the water. His legs had gone numb, and the soles bore marks where fish had bitten him, though he had not noticed them during the struggle. When the sun rose, His legs were badly swollen. He could barely stand and at times had to crawl or move on his knees. He ate fruit, drank fresh water, and kept moving until some strength returned. He remained on the island until he had recovered further. Then the island broke its silence with a sound Sinbad had no reason to expect, a horse neighing. He followed the sound and found a magnificent mare tethered near the coast. As he approached, a man emerged from a concealed place in the ground and called out to him. The man took Sinbad by the hand and led him down through underground passages into a large hall beneath the earth. He seated Sinbad there and brought him food. Sinbad ate until he was full. Only then did the man ask who he was and how he had reached the island. Sinbad told him about the shipwreck. The man explained that he and the others were grooms in the service of the island's king. Once each month, at a time fixed by the moon, they brought the royal mares to that part of the coast. Wild sea stallions came out of the water and mounted the mares, then tried to drag them back into the sea while the grooms remained hidden nearby. Sinbad soon saw the strange ritual for himself. A sea stallion rose from the water, mounted the tethered mare, and tried to pull her toward the sea. The grooms rushed from hiding, shouting and striking the ground until the stallion fled back into the water. The grooms explained that if one of the mares conceived by a sea stallion, she would later bear a foal of extraordinary value, unlike any ordinary horse. At dawn, they took Sinbad inland to the city and brought him before King Mihrajan. Sinbad told the king his story from beginning to end. The king marveled at his escape, treated him kindly, and allowed him to remain in the city. The king appointed Sinbad to the harbor and put him in charge of recording the ships that entered the port. Every arriving vessel came under his notice, and he watched the harbor closely for news, familiar cargo, or anyone who might know the route back toward Basra. During his stay, Sinbad also saw an island called Kabil, where the sound of tambourines and drums could be heard throughout the night. He saw a fish 200 cubits long and another whose face resembled an owl's. Much later, the harbor gave him something even less expected, a familiar ship. Sinbad knew its sails before he allowed himself to believe what he was seeing. It was his ship. Among the bales and packages were goods he recognized as his own. Sinbad approached the captain. "Those goods are mine." The captain stared at him. "They belonged to a merchant named Sinbad of Baghdad. He was lost when the island sank beneath him. I meant to sell them and, if I could find his family, send the money to them in Baghdad. I am Sinbad." The captain's expression hardened. He had watched the sea close over the men left behind and had no reason to believe one of them had crossed back from the dead. "Do not claim the property of a dead man," he warned. So Sinbad told him what had happened from the moment the living island plunged beneath the water. The wooden basin, the real island, the royal grooms, and the king. He gave details only a passenger from that voyage could have known. The captain listened. Recognition came slowly. The captain and the merchants recognized him and accepted his story as true. At last, the captain's disbelief broke. "By God, we thought you were dead. So did I." Once the captain accepted the truth, he returned Sinbad's goods. Sinbad found his name written on them, with nothing missing. That cargo changed everything. Sinbad sold part of it on the island and bought valuable local goods with the proceeds. He gave gifts to the king who had helped him. The king rejoiced at his survival, honored him, and gave him many gifts in return. He continued trading as the ship traveled from port to port. After continuing to trade from island to island, Sinbad reached Basra and then Baghdad with great profit. Back home, he gave alms and charitable gifts, acquired servants and property, and returned to a life of comfort. Sinbad ended the first voyage, gave the porter 100 gold coins, and told him to return the next morning. One voyage was over. 6 remained. One voyage had ended beneath Baghdad's familiar sky. 6 more waited beyond it, though Sinbad did not yet know why. The porter came again. Sinbad began once more. For a little while, Baghdad had held him close to shore. Then trade and distant islands drew his mind away. He carried goods to Basra and set sail without delay. From island on to island, buying, selling as they passed, until a peaceful shore became the place of danger at last. Fresh water ran through it, and trees grew thick with fruit. Several passengers went ashore to eat and rest. Sinbad walked farther inland than the others and found shade beneath a tree. The meal, the heat, and the steady sound of leaves in the wind made him drowsy. He fell asleep. When he woke, the light had changed. So had the silence. A sudden unease brought him upright. Something was wrong. The island was silent. Sinbad ran toward the shore. The bay was empty. He had fallen asleep while the others returned to the ship, and now he was alone. He returned inland and began searching for the highest point on the island. He climbed a tall tree and looked across the forest. Above the trees stood something white and wide, too smooth for rock, too vast to set aside. No door, no seam, no mark of human hands. He paced it. 50 paces round it spanned. Then daylight dimmed across the waiting ground. Sinbad looked up as shadow swept around. What crossed the sun was no cloud passing by. The white dome was an egg beneath the sky. The rock descended. The force of its wings bent the trees. It settled over the egg as evening approached, folding its body above it. Sinbad hid nearby and watched. He had no ship, no food beyond what the island offered, and no way to know whether another vessel would ever stop there. The rock, however, would leave. And where it went, there might be people, or at least somewhere else. Sinbad removed his turban and twisted the cloth into a rope. Under cover of darkness, he crept toward one of the bird's legs. The leg was thicker than a tree trunk. He tied himself tightly to it. He remained tied to the bird through the night. At dawn, the rock rose into the air with terrifying speed. The island dropped away beneath him. Wind tore at his clothes. The sea became a sheet of hammered metal far below. Sinbad shut his eyes and clung to the knot around his body. The rock flew inland over mountains. At last, it descended. The moment its foot touched ground, Sinbad tore at the cloth, freed himself, and rolled away. The rock was gone. Another danger stayed. Sheer cliffs enclosed the valley like a blade. A stone flashed bright beneath Sinbad's hand, a diamond. Then another in the sand. Some small as nails, some larger than any jeweler had known. For one brief breath, impossible riches brightly shone. Then scraping sounded somewhere at his back. A serpent moved between the stones and cracks. It was large enough to swallow an elephant whole. Sinbad stepped back, and wealth became a trap. The valley, he realized, was full of them. They hid during the brightest part of the day, sheltering from the rocks and other great birds that hunted them. At night, they emerged. Sinbad searched for shelter and found a narrow cave. From inside, he pushed a large stone across the entrance. The cave looked like shelter until Sinbad turned around. A huge serpent lay asleep at the back of it upon its eggs. His whole body shuddered. He spent the entire night awake. Dawn got him out of the cave. It did not get him out of the valley. Dawn drove the serpents back, but left the cliffs too high. Then slabs of raw meat began to fall from the sky. A merchant's old method returned to Sinbad's mind. If birds could lift the meat, a man might rise behind. A slab of raw meat struck the ground nearby. Sinbad stared at it. Another piece landed farther away. A third piece followed. Sinbad remembered how diamond merchants collected stones from valleys like this. They threw pieces of meat down from the cliffs so diamonds would stick to them, and great birds carried the meat back to their nests, where the stones could be recovered. Sinbad gathered the best diamonds he could carry. Then he chose the largest piece of meat and bound himself beneath it with his turban. All he could do was wait. The smell was terrible. The sun climbed. At last, shadows moved above him. Talons struck the meat. The world lifted. Sinbad swung beneath the rock as it climbed out of the valley. He could see nothing except flashes of cliff and sky. The bird carried him toward a nest high above. The instant they landed, the merchants began shouting loudly to frighten the rock away. The rock released the meat and flew away. Sinbad untied himself and sat up. The merchants were astonished to see a man emerge with the meat. They asked how he had reached the valley, and Sinbad told them the whole story. The merchant whose piece of meat had carried Sinbad out received no diamonds from it, so Sinbad gave him several of the large stones he had gathered. Their route carried him to another island, where a single camphor tree could shade 100 people. Workers bored into the top of a trunk with a long tool. Camphor water flowed out and hardened like gum. Once it was taken, the tree withered and became firewood. The sailors spoke of a beast they called the Karkadan, a massive, one-horned animal, larger than a camel and powerful enough to challenge an elephant. A single thick horn rose from the middle of its head, about 10 cubits long, and upon it could be seen what looked like the figure of a human being. The sailors told him what happened when a Karkadan attacked an elephant. It struck the elephant with its horn, lifted the animal clear of the ground, and carried it until the elephant died. Under the heat of the sun, the dead elephant could cause the Karkadan to become blind. And when the blinded beast wandered near the coast, still carrying the dead elephant, a rock might descend, seize both animals, and carry them away to feed its young. Sinbad traded some of his diamonds for other valuable goods and continued from island to island, carrying camphor and other merchandise west. Eventually, Sinbad found passage to Basra. He remained there for a few days, then continued to Baghdad. When he returned to Baghdad, he resumed his life there in comfort. Sinbad ended the second voyage and gave the porter another 100 gold coins. He told the porter to return the next morning. 2 voyages were over. 5 remained. 2 voyages ended. 5 remained beyond the shore. Each safe return still left the sea asking for more. The porter came again. The 3rd sea tale was due. Sinbad welcomed every guest and began when feasting was through. Rest had healed his body. Baghdad softened pain, but distant lands grew louder, drawing him to trade again. He carried goods to Basra and joined a merchant crew. Then rough water broke the easy route they thought they knew. The captain's fear arrived before the danger did. He struck his face, furled the sails, cast the anchors, and tore at his clothes. The current, he warned, had carried them toward the Mountain of the Apes, a place from which few who reached it ever escaped. The vessel was carried close to shore. Then figures appeared among the trees. They were misshapen little beings, 4 handspans tall, with yellow eyes, black faces, and hair like black felt, and they were numerous enough to make the beach seem alive. At first, the passengers assumed they were people from an unfamiliar tribe. The captain's face went pale. The captain lifted one hand, stopping the first impulse toward resistance. Do not fight them. Whatever happens, do not fight them. Why? One merchant demanded. Because there are too many of them. Kill one, and the rest will tear us apart. The warning against resistance came too late to change anything. The creatures swarmed toward the ship and climbed up along the anchor ropes. They cut the anchor ropes with their teeth, then bit through the ship's other lines from every side. Freed from its lines, the ship swung with the wind and came to rest against their rocky shore. They poured aboard in such numbers that resistance was impossible. They seized the merchants and passengers and forced them off the ship. With the passengers forced ashore, the creatures took possession of the vessel itself. They carried away the ship with everything that was still aboard and took it to their own place. Within minutes, Sinbad and the others were stranded on the island. The survivors moved inland, eating what fruit they could find and drinking fresh water. The first place that looked like shelter was a strongly built palace with high walls. Its entrance stood open behind two great doors of ebony. Inside was a wide courtyard, with many high doorways around it and a large raised platform at the far end. Cooking vessels hung near the hearths. Bones lay scattered all around them. Human bones. The survivors stared at one another and waited, afraid to move farther into the place. No one appeared during the day. At sunset, shelter learned the shape of dread. A figure crossed the palace threshold instead. Black, vast, and tall as a great palm tree, with eyes like flame, it froze the men who tried to flee. The men scattered against the walls. The giant began examining them one by one. It reached for Sinbad first, lifted him, and felt his body from head to foot. Finding him thin and wasted, it dropped him aside. It moved from man to man, lifting and testing each one in turn. At last, the giant chose the captain, who was the fattest, strongest, and broadest-shouldered among them. The captain screamed. The creature seized the captain and took his life. Then it placed him over the fire and ate him while the others watched. After eating, it lay down on the raised platform and slept, snoring like thunder. Nobody moved for a long time. At dawn, the creature rose and left the palace. The survivors went out across the island, searching for some place where they might hide or escape. They found no refuge. Morning gave the survivors a few hours without the giant, but not away off the island. They gathered together and agreed that waiting in the palace meant being eaten one by one. So they decided to build a single raft and trust themselves to the sea if they had to. They gathered timber, lashed it together, and made one crude raft large enough to carry them. They left the raft tied at the shoreline so it would be ready when they needed it. With no safer shelter on the island, they returned to the palace before nightfall. Night brought the giant back. Again it examined the men one by one until one of them pleased it. It seized another man, took his life, and ate him just as it had eaten the captain. Another man was eaten. Waiting meant the same. So Sinbad and the others turned toward the flame. They took 2 iron spits and held them to the heat until both burned red with heat no hand could meet. Then toward the sleeping giant they moved without a sound, and with the glowing iron left the giant blinded on the ground. Its scream shook all the palace as the survivors turned and fled. They ran toward the shore and the raft they had prepared. Behind them the blinded giant roared. The survivors pushed the single raft into the sea and climbed aboard. For several seconds, the raft felt like freedom. Then the blinded giant appeared on the shore with 2 others like him. The 3 giants seized boulders and hurled them toward the fleeing raft. Boulders crashed into the water around the crowded raft. Some struck the raft itself, Others struck the men aboard. Men were struck or swept into the sea until only 3 remained. Only Sinbad and 2 companions remained. The craft carried them onward until they reached another island near the end of the day. Hunger forced them inland, where they found fruit and fresh water. Exhausted beyond caution, they lay down on the ground beneath the trees and slept. The raft had crossed one terror, but not the last. Only 3 men remained when sea and stone were passed. They slept beneath the trees, too weak for flight, till one man's scream tore through the silent night. That night, a scream tore Sinbad awake. The new island had shown them what lived there. A huge serpent had surrounded one of his companions. The serpent seized and swallowed one of his companions while Sinbad watched helplessly. He and the remaining survivor endured the rest of the night in terror. The next day they chose a tall tree and climbed into its branches before darkness returned. They went as high as they could. It did not save them. The serpent returned the next night. It coiled around the trunk, raised its body, and reached the other man. Sinbad could do nothing but listen as the serpent seized and swallowed his last companion. By dawn, Sinbad was alone. Fear had driven him nearly mad. He even thought of throwing himself into the sea rather than face another night, but the desire to live held him back. Instead, fear became a plan. Sinbad spent the day gathering broad pieces of wood. He tied one crosswise over his feet, one along his right side, one along his left, another across his belly, and a long, broad piece crosswise above his head. When he was finished, the wood enclosed him on every side while leaving enough room to breathe. When night came, he lay inside it. The serpent arrived. It tried to coil around him but could not crush the wooden frame. It struck repeatedly, searching for an opening. The serpent kept circling and trying to reach him, but the wooden barrier held until dawn. At dawn, the serpent finally withdrew. Sinbad crawled out shaking and went to the shore with no plan except to avoid another night. Then a sail appeared on the horizon. Sinbad tore a large branch from a tree and waved it toward the vessel with all the strength he had left. The vessel changed course. A boat came ashore. They gave him food and clean clothing and brought him aboard. Aboard the ship, the crew asked how he had reached the island, and Sinbad told them the whole chain of disasters. The creatures that had taken the ship, the giant, the raft, and the serpent. The ship continued until it reached a trading island. There, while merchants unloaded their goods, Sinbad heard the captain give instructions about a separate cargo. The captain pointed to the bales. "Sell these. They belong to a man from Baghdad who was lost at sea. If we can learn whether his family still lives, the money should go to them." Sinbad turned toward the cargo. The goods were familiar. So was the name the captain gave. Sinbad the Sailor. Sinbad stepped forward. "I am that man." The captain did not believe him. Several merchants gathered around. Some thought Sinbad was telling the truth. Others thought a desperate stranger had heard the name and invented a claim. A merchant pushed through the group. He had heard them mention the Valley of Diamonds and recognized Sinbad as the very man who had once emerged from that valley with the merchant's own piece of meat. The merchant pointed at Sinbad. "I know this man. He came out of the Diamond Valley alive, gave me some of the diamonds he carried, and later traveled with us as far as Basra." The captain asked for one final proof. "What mark was on your goods?" Sinbad described the mark, and the description matched. The captain accepted him, returned his goods, and praised God for his safety. Sinbad sold and traded them as the voyage continued. Afterward, With favorable winds, they continued until they reached Basra. Sinbad remained there for a few days, then returned to Baghdad. Back in Baghdad, he gave alms and gifts, clothed widows and orphans, and gathered his friends around him. Sinbad finished the third voyage and gave the porter another 100 gold coins. He told the porter to return the next morning. 3 voyages were over. 4 remained. 3 voyages ended. 4 remained to tell. Each road from danger led to something stranger still. Before a foreign shore could rise, the 4th voyage met the gale. Sinbad had sailed from Basra with merchants under sail. Then wind tore through the canvas, scattering men and load. And wreckage, not a ship, became the survivor's road. The next morning, the porter returned as promised. The 4th voyage would turn dangerous before Sinbad ever reached a strange shore. Once again, Sinbad had longed for trade and travel. He bought valuable merchandise in Baghdad, traveled to Basra, and loaded his goods aboard a ship with a company of leading merchants. They sailed from island to island, buying and selling as they went. Then the wind changed. A violent storm struck, tore the sails, scattered cargo and men into the sea, and wrecked the vessel. By God's mercy, Sinbad found a broad piece of timber from the wrecked ship. A group of merchants had survived with him, and together they clung to the same piece of wreckage. Wind and waves carried them for a day and a night. On the 2nd day, they were cast onto an unfamiliar island, exhausted by hunger, cold, fear, and thirst. The island that received the survivors looked generous. It was rich with fruit, so they ate enough to quiet their hunger and spent the night near the shore. The next morning, the island's people found them. They spoke a language none of the survivors understood, but gestures were enough. They led the shipwrecked men before their king. Their king welcomed them with bowls of food. The food was unfamiliar, nothing the survivors recognized or had ever seen before. Sinbad's stomach recoiled from it, and he ate none. His companions ate greedily. Before long, their judgment left them. Their fear disappeared, and they kept eating more and more. The bowls kept coming. Reason slipped away. His companions lost their judgment day by day. They ate and slept. Their eyes grew dull and dim, while islanders kept watch on flesh and limb. Then Sinbad saw what every bowl concealed. The purpose of the feeding stood revealed. Not honored guests, but captives kept to feed, for some dark purpose hidden in their greed. Sinbad continued refusing their food. As the others gained weight, he became thinner. His refusal to eat saved him in the strangest way. The islanders paid less attention to him because he seemed too thin to interest them. When a chance finally came, Sinbad walked away until the settlement disappeared behind him. Then he ran until his lungs burned. He kept moving across the island until he came upon a shepherd seated on a raised place. The shepherd saw Sinbad approaching and signaled to him from a distance. "Go back the way you came, then take the road on your right. It will lead you to the royal road," he called. Sinbad did as he was told. He turned back, took the road on his right, and followed it to the royal road, sometimes hurrying from fear and sometimes slowing when exhaustion overcame him. He continued for 7 days and nights, living on plants and whatever water he could find. On the morning of the 8th day, the wilderness ended with another surprise. Men gathering black clusters from vines and trees. They were collecting pepper. Sinbad approached carefully. The workers were astonished to see him. The pepper gatherers surrounded him and asked who he was and where he had come from. Sinbad told them what had happened. When their work was finished, the pepper gatherers took Sinbad down to the shore, put him aboard their vessel, and crossed with him to their own island. From there, they brought him before their king. For the first time since the wreck, a king offered Sinbad protection instead of danger. The kingdom was wealthy and organized. Merchants traveled through its markets, and horses were prized. Sinbad noticed that the king and his horsemen rode without saddles or stirrups of the kind he knew from Baghdad. One day, Sinbad raised the question of why the king rode without a saddle. Puzzled, the king wanted to know what a saddle was. Sinbad explained that he could make one, and the king ordered him to make one. Sinbad brought in a carpenter and had a wooden saddle tree shaped to his design. He padded it, covered it with fine leather, and had a blacksmith make iron stirrups. When it was finished, he placed it on one of the king's finest horses. The king mounted, rode, and was delighted. He rewarded Sinbad generously. Then the ministers, nobles, and leading men of the city began asking for saddles of their own. Sinbad had more made, earned a great deal of money, and rose further in the king's favor. The king came to trust him. That trust would change the rest of the voyage. Time passed. Sinbad traded again. He learned the language and became known at court. Eventually, the king raised the matter directly. He told Sinbad that he wanted him to marry a good, beautiful, graceful woman of wealth and beauty and become a permanent resident of the kingdom, and told him not to refuse. Sinbad was embarrassed before the king and remained silent. The king sent for the local judge and witnesses, and the marriage contract was completed. His bride was a woman of noble standing and high lineage, of great wealth and generosity, distinguished family, remarkable beauty, and the owner of property, estates, and other holdings. For a time, marriage and comfort made the voyage feel finished. The king had given Sinbad a large, handsome house, servants and attendants, and regular allowances for his household. Sinbad lived with his wife in great comfort and ease, and the hardships of his earlier travels began to fade from his mind. Then, after some time, a neighbor's wife died. Sinbad went to console the grieving husband and prayed that God would grant him another wife and a long life. The grieving husband answered with a sentence that changed everything. He had only one day left to live. In that kingdom, when a married person died, the surviving spouse was buried with the body, alive. Before Sinbad could make sense of it, townspeople arrived to prepare the funeral. The dead woman was dressed in fine clothing and jewelry. Her husband walked behind the procession wearing burial clothes. They traveled outside the city to a mountain. A great stone was moved aside, revealing a deep shaft leading into a cavern. The woman's body was lowered first. Her living husband followed. He was lowered with 7 loaves of bread and a large jug of fresh water. When the stone was replaced, Sinbad returned home in horror, with one question he could no longer avoid. He went to the king and asked whether foreigners were also bound by this custom. They were. Because Sinbad had married a woman of the city, the king told him the custom applied to him as well. The custom spared no foreigner who married in that land. Sinbad heard the judgment and understood where he now stood. Then the danger became personal. Sinbad's wife fell ill. Her illness worsened. She died. People came to wash and dress the body. Neighbors arrived to offer condolences. Servants brought burial clothing for him. Sinbad protested that he was a stranger and could not endure their custom, but they ignored his words and prepared him for burial. The funeral procession climbed the mountain. His wife's body was lowered into the cavern. A rope was tied around Sinbad. Her body went below. Then Sinbad faced the rope. 7 loaves and fresh water measured what remained of hope. He descended living toward the bodies of the dead, and above him, stone prepared to close the world instead. With 7 loaves of bread and a jug of fresh water lowered beside him, Sinbad descended alive into the cavern. The smell reached him before the floor did. Death, old bodies, decay trapped in stone. His feet touched the ground. He tore the rope away. Above him, daylight narrowed. Then the stone closed above him. Darkness became complete. Sinbad called for help until his voice broke. No one answered. Sinbad rationed the bread and water and searched the cavern in darkness. There was no visible exit. His food diminished. He tried to calculate how many days remained. Just as his food diminished, stone scraped against stone overhead. Light appeared. Sinbad shouted. Another funeral had arrived. Sinbad heard crying. A body was lowered. A living person followed. This time it was a woman whose husband had died. She carried the customary bread and water. The opening closed again. After the opening closed, desperation drove Sinbad to take the woman's life and claim her bread and water. The dead woman's bread and water extended his survival. The funerals kept coming. Each time, he did the same to the surviving spouse, taking the bread and water and gathering jewels and valuables from the dead. Funerals fed his survival, but no opening offered day. Then a different scraping sounded from deeper stone away. Fresh air touched his face where darkness should have stayed. He followed it toward a passage an animal had made. Then, from deeper in the cavern, came a sound that did not come from the opening above, a scraping noise. Sinbad followed it until fresh air touched his face, then crawled toward it. A wild animal had found another opening into the burial cave. Sinbad saw a faint point of light ahead and forced himself through a narrow passage. The opening emerged on the side of the mountain near the sea. Daylight blinded him. He lay outside, laughing and crying until he had no strength left for either. For the first time since the stone had closed, he was free. Day after day, he returned to the cavern and carried out jewels, gold objects, and valuable ornaments from the dead. Eventually, a sail appeared offshore. Sinbad signaled it. A boat came to investigate. The sailors wanted to know how any man had reached such an isolated coast. Sinbad deliberately gave them a different story. He told them he was a merchant whose ship had been wrecked, that he had survived on a plank with his belongings, and that God had brought him ashore there. He said nothing about the city or the burial cavern, fearing that someone aboard might come from that place and kill him. They took him aboard. In gratitude, Sinbad offered his rescuer some of the jewels he had carried from the burial cave. The man refused, saying they accepted no payment from castaways they saved. They sailed from island to island and sea to sea until they reached Basra. After a few days there, Sinbad continued to Baghdad. When he finally entered his own house, servants celebrated. Friends came to see the man they had assumed dead. Sinbad stored the goods he had brought back, gave alms and gifts, clothed widows and orphans, and thanked God for deliverance. Sinbad finished the 4th voyage and gave the porter another 100 gold coins. He told him to return the next morning. 4 voyages were over. 3 remained. 4 voyages ended. 3 remained ahead. He had escaped a grave built for the living and the dead. The 5th tale opened when old fears declined, as Baghdad left his former wounds behind. Then travel called him back toward Basra's shore. He bought his goods and high-built ship once more. With sailors, servants, merchants, goods aboard, he traded isle to isle in lands abroad. Eventually, the ship reached a large deserted island. A group of merchants went ashore to explore while Sinbad remained aboard. The disaster began with a white dome on the shore. Not knowing it was a roc's egg, the merchants struck it with stones until the shell broke. A young roc came out. They dragged it free, took its life, and removed a great quantity of meat from it. Sinbad knew nothing of what they had done until one of the passengers called to him. He looked toward the shore, saw the shattered shell, and understood at once. The meaning hit him before the danger did. "What have you done?" he shouted. "That is a roc's egg. Its parents will come, and they will destroy us. Back to the ship, now." The warning came too late for the chick, but not too late for the men. The merchants rushed back aboard, and the captain ordered the sails raised. The ship left the island as quickly as the wind allowed. Then the sky behind the vessel darkened wide. Two enormous shadows beat across the tide. The adult rocs had found the fleeing men. Their cries rolled out, then crossed the sea again. Each bird held a boulder in its talons. The captain shouted for the crew to turn. The first roc released its stone. The boulder fell like a piece of the sky. It struck the water beside the ship and raised a wave that nearly rolled the vessel onto its side. Men were thrown across the deck. Then the second bird circled. Sinbad watched its claws open. Its boulder struck the stern. The ship shattered beneath the blow. The rudder broke into 20 pieces. The ship disappeared beneath him. Sinbad went underwater amid ropes, broken timber, cargo, and screaming men, then surfaced beside a plank and held on. Behind him, the ship sank. The rocks disappeared toward the island. Wind and waves carried him to another island, where he reached the shore alone. Clear streams crossed green ground. Fruit grew in abundance. Trees provided shade. There were no obvious predators and no sign of human settlement. Sinbad ate, drank, and rested. The next island seemed a place of perfect peace, with fruit and running water offering ease. Beside the stream, an old man waited still. No spoken word, no sign of hidden will. He pointed to Sinbad's back, then across the flow, and Sinbad understood where the old man wished to go. Pity bent him down. Sinbad agreed at last. The old man climbed upon him and held fast. The old man climbed onto his shoulders and wrapped his legs around Sinbad's neck. Sinbad stood and carried him across the stream. When they reached the other side, he bent down. "Here we are." On the other side, the old man did not move. Sinbad tried again. Then the legs tightened around his throat. He could not breathe. The old man's legs were powerful, their skin dark and rough like buffalo hide. They tightened until the world went black and Sinbad lost consciousness. He fell to the ground like a dead man. The old man loosened his grip only to strike Sinbad's back and shoulders with his heels until Sinbad rose again. The old man pointed forward. Sinbad understood. Walk. He walked. For the rest of the day, the creature on his shoulders directed him from one fruit tree to another. It ate while Sinbad carried it. When Sinbad slowed, the old man struck his back and sides with his heels. When he tried to sit, the legs tightened. At sunset, Sinbad hoped the old man would climb down to sleep. He did not. The legs remained locked around his neck through the night. Sinbad slept on the ground with the old man still attached to him. At dawn, the kicking began again. Days passed. The old man forced Sinbad to carry him from place to place, beating him when he slowed and tightening his legs around his neck whenever he resisted. Sinbad grew weak and feared he would die beneath the old man's weight. Beneath the old man's weight, Sinbad grew thin, till grapes and gourd revealed a way to win. The wine grew strong. The old man drank his share. His grip grew loose. Escape was waiting there. His first real chance to escape came in the form of a dried gourd. The shell was hollow and hard. Sinbad cleaned it, squeezed juice from grapes he found growing wild, and sealed the container. He hid it. Days later, he opened the gourd. The juice had fermented. From then on, Sinbad drank from it each day to strengthen himself for the burden. One day, the wine lifted his spirits. He danced between the trees, clapped, and sang. The old man noticed the gourd and pointed to it. Sinbad, afraid of provoking him, handed it over. The creature drank, and drank again. Soon the old man's grip loosened. For the first time in days, the old man's legs relaxed. Sinbad waited. The wine overwhelmed him. His limbs loosened, and he began to sway on Sinbad's shoulders. That was enough. Sinbad threw him to the ground and took his life with a heavy stone. Sinbad left the body where it had fallen and returned to the shore. There he saw a group of sailors who had come ashore from a passing ship. They were astonished to find him alive. When Sinbad described the old man who had locked his legs around his neck, the sailors' expressions changed. One of them spoke first, the old man of the sea. Others had been trapped by him before. No one had ever escaped him before Sinbad. Escaping the old man brought Baghdad no more near. The city of apes awaited, ruled each night by fear. By day, its people worked. By night, the apes held sway. And every dusk they slept offshore until the break of day. Escaping the old man of the sea did not take Sinbad home. The sailors carried him instead to the city of apes, a great coastal city in the farthest lands of the Sudan. Its tall buildings faced the sea, but the city had a rule stranger than its skyline. Nobody willingly slept inside it. As night approached, the reason began to move through the streets. The inhabitants left through the gates, went down to the water, and climbed into boats and ships. They spent the night offshore because the apes came down from the mountains after dark and took possession of the city. A local man noticed Sinbad watching them. "You are a stranger here, aren't you?" Sinbad told him that he had arrived without money or friends and did not know the customs of the place. The man pointed toward the departing boats. "Then do not stay in the city tonight. If the apes find a man here after dark, they will kill him." He took Sinbad with him, and Sinbad spent the night at sea with the townspeople. At dawn, the apes left the streets. The inhabitants returned to their homes and work, while the apes went out among the orchards to feed and then withdrew toward the mountains until evening. The next day, the same man gave Sinbad a sack and took him outside the city to groves of tall coconut palms. The trunks were too smooth and high to climb. The man showed Sinbad what to do: pick up stones and throw them at the monkeys in the branches. Sinbad threw stones at the monkeys in the branches. They responded by tearing coconuts from the trees and hurling them down. Sinbad gathered the coconuts, carried them back to the city, and sold them. He returned the next day and did the same thing again. His new friend gave him a place to store the coconuts. Day after day, Sinbad repeated the work until he had enough to trade and enough money to think once more about finding a ship home. Eventually, a merchant ship arrived and anchored off the city. Its traders began buying, selling, and bartering, including for coconuts. Sinbad told the man who had helped him that he intended to return home, thanked him for his kindness, and said farewell. Then he approached the captain, paid for passage, loaded his coconuts and other goods aboard, and sailed with the ship. But the voyage did not take him straight home. They sailed from island to island and from sea to sea. At each stop, Sinbad sold or bartered some of his coconuts, replacing what he had lost with new merchandise. They reached an island rich in cinnamon and cloves, and Sinbad traded coconuts for both. People there told them of clove clusters protected by large leaves that covered them when rain fell and turned aside again when the rain stopped. From there, they passed the island of Kamari, where Kamari aloes wood grew. 5 days farther on, they reached another island where Chinese aloes wood grew and was considered less valuable than the Kamari variety. The inhabitants of that island were worse in conduct and religion than the people of the Kamari Island. They loved corruption and wine and knew neither the call to prayer nor the practice of prayer. At last, the route brought him to the pearl diving grounds. Sinbad gave the divers some of his coconuts and told them to dive for his share. They went down into the sea on his behalf and brought up many large, valuable pearls. They continued sailing until they reached Basra. Sinbad remained there for a few days, then traveled on to Baghdad. When Sinbad returned to Baghdad, his household celebrated again. By the end of the voyage, God had compensated him with more than the wealth and goods he had lost. Sinbad stored the merchandise and belongings he had brought back, clothed widows and orphans, gave alms and gifts, and distributed presents among his family, friends, and companions. Sinbad gave the porter another 100 gold coins and told him to return the next morning. 5 voyages were over. 2 remained. 5 voyages ended. 2 remained in store. Baghdad received him. The sea still had more. The 6th tale opened on a road Sinbad already knew, as trade drew him to Basra and the waiting sea anew. From city unto city, merchants bought and sold. For a time, the voyage prospered as of old. Then the captain cried out. He struck his face, tore at his beard, threw off his turban, and collapsed onto the deck in grief. The merchants and passengers crowded around him. What is it? The captain looked at them. We have lost our way. We have left the sea whose routes we knew and entered waters we do not know. Unless God delivers us, we are lost. He called on everyone aboard to pray for rescue. The warning had barely settled before a violent wind drove the vessel toward a great mountain rising from the sea. The ship struck. Its planks broke apart, scattering cargo and passengers into the water. Some drowned. Others were cast onto the mountain's shore. Sinbad was among those who survived. When the sea calmed, their prison became plain. A great mountain shut the shore behind them like a chain. No road, no settlement, no passage could be found, yet gems and wealth lay scattered all around. Gems lay among the stones. Pieces of crystal and valuable minerals glittered in cracks, and great royal pearls lay like pebbles in the watercourses. The island also held a spring of raw ambergris that flowed like melted wax in the heat toward the sea. Great sea creatures swallowed the substance when it reached the water and later cast it out again, leaving ambergris along the shore. Goods from earlier wrecks were scattered among rocks and caves, some ruined, others preserved. While exploring the island, Sinbad also found a river of fresh water that emerged from beneath one side of the mountain and disappeared beneath it again on the other. They gathered what food remained from the wreck and rationed it carefully, sometimes eating only once every day or two because they feared it would run out. The treasure stayed. The men did not. One by one, the living vanished from the shore. Soon Sinbad faced a grave he meant to dig for himself, until the river under Mountain Stone offered one path more. As the days passed, the survivors weakened and died one by one. Whenever one of them died, the others washed the body, wrapped it in clothing and cloth that the sea had cast onto the shore, and buried it. One by one, the survivors disappeared until Sinbad was alone. With only a little food left, Sinbad began digging his own grave. He meant that when death came close, he would lie inside it and let the wind cover him with sand. He wept, blamed himself for leaving Baghdad yet again, and repented of the sea journeys that had brought him there. Then he looked again at the freshwater river flowing beneath the mountain. A river, he reasoned, must have an outlet somewhere. Waiting beside his grave meant death. The river at least went somewhere, so he decided to trust himself to the current. He gathered Chinese and Kamari aloes wood from the island and lashed the timber together into a small raft. He also shaped 2 pieces of wood into paddles. Before leaving, he loaded the raft with precious stones, pearls, ambergris, aloes wood, and selected goods from the wrecks, along with his remaining food and water. Before committing himself to the river, Sinbad remembered another verse. Leave any place that does you wrong. Let empty walls lament when you're gone. Another land can take land's place. No other life can take your place. Do not despair when dark nights fall. Every sorrow must end after all. If death is written for one ground, no other soil will lay you down. For weighty matters, go yourself. No better envoy than yourself. Sinbad pushed the raft into the river, and the mountain swallowed him. The passage narrowed around the raft. At times, the roof dropped so low that Sinbad's head rubbed against it, but the current carried him onward. In the darkness, he could no longer distinguish day from night. Eventually, sleep overcame him, and the raft continued, carrying him onward while he slept. When he woke, darkness had become daylight. His raft was tied beside an island in the river, and a group of Indians and Abyssinians stood around him. They were farmers who had come to water their fields and crops. Sinbad could not understand their language. Then one of the men stepped forward and spoke to him in Arabic. Peace be upon you, brother. Who are you? Where did you come from? And what brought you to this place? The man explained that they had found him asleep on the raft, pulled it in, and tied it so the current would not carry him away. Sinbad gestured toward the food. Give me something to eat first, and I will tell you. They brought him food. He ate until his strength began to return. When he could speak at length, he told them about the wreck, the trapped coast, the men who had died, and the river that had carried him beneath the mountain. Then the farmers looked at the raft. It was loaded with gems, minerals, ambergris, and goods salvaged from ships whose owners had never escaped. The men brought Sinbad and his raft before their king. Sinbad told him the story of the wreck in the underground river. The king was astonished by the account and ordered that Sinbad be treated as an honored guest. In return, Sinbad brought out a generous portion of the minerals, jewels, aloes wood, and raw ambergris from the raft and presented them to the king. The king accepted the gift and honored him even more. Sinbad remained there for a time as an honored guest. During his stay, people of the country asked Sinbad about Baghdad, and he, in turn, asked them about their own land. When the king asked about the ruler of Baghdad, Sinbad described the caliph's justice, wisdom, and good government. The king marveled at what he heard and told Sinbad that his account had made him admire the caliph. He decided to send the caliph a gift and entrusted it to Sinbad. At last, merchants announced that they were sailing toward Basra. Sinbad asked permission to leave. The king granted it, gave him gifts of his own, paid his passage, and placed the royal gift in his care. Sinbad reached Basra safely, remained there for several days, then traveled to Baghdad. He went to the caliph's court, presented the royal gift, and told him of the distant king who had sent it. Sinbad then returned home, stored his goods, embraced his family and friends, distributed gifts, and gave money to the poor. Some time later, the Caliph sent for him again because of the gift and asked where it had come from. Sinbad explained that he did not know the city's name or the route to it. After his shipwreck, the underground river had carried him there. He recounted the wreck, the coast of riches, and the river beneath the mountain. The Caliph marveled at the story and ordered the court historians to write it down and preserve it among his records. Sinbad finished the 6th voyage and gave the porter another 100 gold coins. He told him to return the next morning for the final voyage. Only one voyage remained. 6 voyages ended. One remained before the final shore. The last tale waited, and Sinbad would sail once more. The porter came again. The 7th tale was due. 6 voyages had passed, yet distant lands still drew. Sinbad had wealth and comfort, safe at home, yet longing stirred and urged him back to Rome. To Basra he returned. His goods he bought, then joined a merchant crew and passage sought. From isle to isle they traded, sea by sea, and bought and sold wherever trade might be. At last, the city of China came in view. Then warning winds rose fierce, the tempest grew. Then the storm struck. The sea rose violently around them. The captain climbed the mast and looked carefully in every direction. When he came down, he was striking his face and tearing at his beard in terror. That frightened the passengers more than the storm. "What is it?" someone shouted. The captain looked at them. "The wind has carried us into the farthest waters. Pray for yourselves. I do not know a safe way out." Then the captain opened a small chest. He took out a pouch containing dust like ash, wet some of it with water, waited a little, and smelled it. After that, he drew out a small book and began to read. What he read changed his face again. "This land is called the region of the kings. Here lies the tomb of Solomon, son of David. Great serpents dwell here, and every ship that reaches this region is met by a great sea creature that swallows it with everything aboard. The ship rose sharply, then dropped low. Thunder rolled across the water, deep and slow. Every face turned toward the rolling sound. Something vast broke through the waves around. At first, Sinbad mistook it for a hill, then saw the living body rising still. It was a fish. Beside it, even the ship looked small and frail. Men began praying. Then a second creature appeared. It was larger than the first. The 2 creatures moved around the vessel while the storm drove the ship between them. The 3rd creature surfaced last. It was larger than either of the others. For several moments, nobody on deck spoke. The 3rd and largest rushed toward the vessel as if to swallow the ship and everyone aboard. The storm reached them first. A tremendous wind drove the ship onto a great reef. The vessel broke apart, its planks scattering as cargo, merchants, and passengers were thrown into the sea. Sinbad went under. Debris struck him when he surfaced. The second time he came up, a broken plank floated within reach. He seized it. When he looked back, the ship was already coming apart. On the plank, with the wreck behind him, Sinbad turned his anger on himself. He repented sincerely before God and vowed that if he survived, he would never set out on another voyage. The sea carried that promise to another island. Wind and waves drove Sinbad onward until they cast him onto a large island, with nothing left on him but a single garment. He reached the shore and collapsed. When he could move again, he found fruit, fresh water, and shade. The island was rich with trees. Streams crossed the ground. He ate from the island's fruit, drank from its streams, and rested until some of his strength returned. Once he felt stronger, he explored farther. On the far side of the island, Sinbad found a broad river of fresh water. The current was strong. The river disappeared toward a mountain. Sinbad stood beside it for a long time. He had seen a river enter a mountain before. He had survived that river on a raft. Remembering it, Sinbad decided to build another. He cut branches and lengths of wood from the island, not knowing what kind of wood it was, and bound them together into a raft. Piece by piece, the raft took shape. When the raft was ready, he pushed it into the river and let the current carry him away. For 3 days after leaving the island, Sinbad drifted along the river, sleeping much of the time. He ate nothing during those 3 days. Whenever thirst became unbearable, he drank from the river. By the end of the 3rd day, hunger, fear, and exhaustion had reduced him almost to helplessness. 3 days without food had worn him weak and low. The river gave him drink, but nowhere else to go. Then mountain stone rose dark across his track. The current seized the raft and gave no turning back. Then a mountain rose ahead. The sight of it brought the terror of the underground river back. Sinbad tried to stop the raft and reach the mountain's side, but the current was too strong. The river took the decision from him. It seized the raft and carried him beneath the mountain. Darkness closed around him, but only briefly. After traveling only a short distance beneath the rock, he saw daylight ahead. The darkness ended in a great valley. The raft emerged from beneath the mountain into a river flowing through it, and Sinbad could neither stop nor steer toward either bank. The current carried him through the valley until the raft finally came to rest beside a large city. People along the bank saw a half-starved stranger riding a sandalwood raft out of a river that came through a mountain. They threw lines. They pulled him toward shore. Sinbad barely had strength to stand. Among the men was an elderly merchant. He covered Sinbad with fine clothes, took him to the bathhouse, and had fragrant, restorative drinks brought to him. After the bath, the merchant took Sinbad home, where the household welcomed him warmly. He seated Sinbad in a comfortable place and served him fine food. Sinbad ate until he was full and thanked God. A servant brought hot water so he could wash his hands, and maidservants brought silk towels for him to dry them. The merchant gave Sinbad a private room and assigned servants to attend to his needs. Sinbad remained there for 3 days, eating and drinking well until his strength returned. On the 4th day, the old merchant came to him with a question Sinbad did not expect. "Come with me to the market." Sinbad frowned. "I have nothing to sell." The merchant smiled. "You arrived riding your merchandise?" Sinbad understood. The raft. The sandalwood. They returned to the river and had the wood carried to the market. The market understood the wood's value immediately. Traders gathered around it. The bidding climbed. The old merchant watched without speaking. When the highest bidder stopped, the old man turned to Sinbad. The old man named the figure without hesitation. "The highest offer is 1,000 gold coins. Will you sell it at that price, or would you rather wait? I can store the sandalwood in my warehouses until the price rises and sell it for you then." Sinbad considered the offer. "Do whatever you think best." The old merchant nodded. "Then I will buy it myself for 100 gold coins more than the merchants offered." Sinbad accepted. The raft had saved Sinbad's life. Now it had made him rich. Then the old man asked to speak with him privately. "I have something else to offer you." Sinbad waited. The old man spoke slowly. "I am old. I have no son. I have one daughter." The merchant continued. "She is young, beautiful and wealthy. Marry her and remain here. Everything I own and possess will be under your hand, and if you later choose to trade or travel, no one will prevent you." Sinbad said nothing for several moments. "You have become like a father to me. I will not oppose what you decide." The merchant sent for the local judge and witnesses. The offer became a marriage. A great feast was prepared. At the feast, Sinbad met the merchant's daughter, now his wife. She was beautiful and possessed great wealth and jewelry, gold, precious stones, and property. For a time, Sinbad lived peacefully. He grew attached to his wife. The old merchant treated him like a son. Sinbad traded, managed property, and learned the city. Then the old merchant died. Sinbad prepared the burial and mourned him sincerely. Afterward, the merchant's property passed into Sinbad's household. His servants became Sinbad's responsibility. His business became Sinbad's responsibility. His wealth became part of the life Sinbad now shared with his wife. His father-in-law had been the chief of the merchants, and no one among them bought or sold without his knowledge. After his death, Sinbad took his place and became their chief. Afterward, Sinbad became friendly with several men in the city. He began to notice something about them. At the beginning of each month, their colors changed, their forms transformed, and wings appeared. The men of the city rose into the air. They flew upward in groups until they disappeared into the sky. Only the women and children remained behind. Sinbad watched this happen more than once. At each month's opening, wings appeared and men took flight. Sinbad watched them leave the city and vanish out of sight. At the beginning of the next month, curiosity overcame caution. Sinbad asked one of the men to take him with them. The man refused at first, but Sinbad persisted until he finally agreed. Sinbad climbed onto his back. The wings spread. The ground dropped away. The city became small beneath them. Mountains flattened. Clouds drifted below. Sinbad held tightly to the man's shoulders. They climbed higher. Then, higher still, Sinbad heard something. Voices. Not from the men around him. The voices came from above. He heard the angels above them glorifying God. Above the earth, he heard the angels glorify God on high. In wonder, Sinbad praised God aloud beneath the sky. His praise had scarcely risen into sound when fire fell and flying men plunged toward the ground. In wonder, Sinbad cried aloud, "Glory be to God, and praise be to God." The answer came at once. Fire descended from heaven and nearly burned the flying men. The flying men scattered and plunged toward the earth. The man carrying him descended onto a high mountain, and the others landed nearby. Then the flying men abandoned Sinbad on a high mountain. Sinbad blamed himself for what he had done and said, "There is no power and no strength except through God, the Most High, the Almighty." He looked down from a height he had never intended to reach. The city was gone from sight, so was any path he recognized. Alone again, he saw two young men approaching. They wore fine clothes, and each carried a staff of red gold. They greeted him peacefully. Sinbad returned the greeting. "Who are you?" One of the young men inclined his head. "Servants of God." They gave Sinbad one of the staffs of red gold, then went on their way and left him alone. Sinbad crossed the mountain alone until a serpent blocked his way. Before long, a huge serpent came out from beneath the mountain. A man was caught in the serpent's jaws, partly swallowed, and cried out for help. Sinbad gripped the golden staff and ran toward the serpent. He raised the staff and struck the serpent across the head. The creature recoiled and opened its jaws. The man fell free, and the serpent twisted away among the rocks. Sinbad helped the stranger stand. The rescued man caught his breath. God sent you to save me. After this, I will not leave you. You are my companion on this mountain. The two men continued together. Then, among the next group, Sinbad recognized a familiar face, the man who had carried him into the sky and then abandoned him on the mountain. Sinbad approached him, apologized, and spoke gently. My friend, this is not how companions treat one another. The flying man answered, You nearly destroyed us by praising God while you were on my back. If I take you again, you must not mention God or praise him while you are on my back. I promise. The man's wings returned. Sinbad climbed onto his back. They rose from the mountain. This time Sinbad kept silent. No fire came from the sky. This time, the flight ended where Sinbad wanted it to, back in the city. The man carried him all the way there, and Sinbad went directly home and told his wife what had happened. His wife heard the story and gave him the warning that finally mattered. These men are brothers of devils, and they do not mention God. Leave this city with me and take our wealth. Sinbad asked whether her father had been one of them. She told him that he had not and had never lived as they did. Sinbad listened. He sold the old merchant's goods little by little and bought merchandise for the journey. A group of men in the city also wanted to travel but had no ship. They bought timber, had a large vessel built, and Sinbad joined them, paying his fare in full. When the vessel was ready, Sinbad brought his wife, their belongings, and their goods aboard. They left the estates and real property behind and sailed from the strange city. They sailed from island to island and sea to sea until they reached Basra safely. Sinbad did not remain there. He hired another vessel, transferred his wife, their baggage, and all their goods aboard, and continued to Baghdad. He returned to his house, was reunited with his family and friends, and stored all the merchandise he had brought back in his warehouses. Then his family counted the years he had been gone. 27 years. They had long since given up hope of seeing him alive. Sinbad told them everything that had happened. They marveled at the story and congratulated him on returning safely. Back in Baghdad, Sinbad repented of further travel by land or sea and thanked God for bringing him home to his family and country. The seventh voyage would be his last. This time, he kept that promise. 7 voyages ended. The long road home was won. Sinbad stopped speaking. For a moment, the courtyard remained quiet. The porter bowed his head. By God, do not hold against me what I did toward you. Sinbad forgave him. From that day on, the porter remained among Sinbad's companions. They lived in friendship, ease, and joy until there came the destroyer of pleasures, the separator of gatherings, the destroyer of palaces and builder of graves, the cup of death. Glory be to the ever-living who never dies.